How do you view this idea of like whiteness?
You know, the thing about race is that it's not rooted in anything in biology. It's made up.
I am here with Ekemini Uwan, who is just like a Renaissance woman of many things. No, accept it. It's true. You're the co-host of Truth's Table, podcast that's been running for many years, very popular, public theologian. Welcome to George Fox Talks. So happy to have you here. There's a kind of view of the world that I think I've adopted, not always from the perspective of my faith, but just like because I live in the world and because I'm an American, because I'm who I am, which is very much like, it's this FOMO view, like this view like, this world is what I have.
Yeah.
Like there's that beautiful line, I think it's from a Mary Oliver poem, which is like, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? It's so gorgeous, but it also embodies this view, which is like, this is all there is, and this is all I have.
Yeah.
And if I don't get what's mine now, or obviously to people, I'm not getting it. And there's a kind of panic that can come over me sometimes with that. But I think even in this focus on what is unseen, you get more of like this view from like Hebrews about like Abraham and Sarah living in tents. This world was not their home.
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
that idea.
I was just reading it just yesterday.
Yeah.
in Hebrews, just really the hall of faith, you know, and just kind of like,
11,
man,
right?
yeah, Hebrews 11,
yeah.
You know, and they were waiting for a better country. Like they knew that this place was not their home.
Wow.
You know, and I think that's a particular vantage point that I think for me as a Black woman, I absolutely take to heart and believe every day. I'm like, this place is not my home because I can only be so comfortable, you know, here as a Black woman in America, you know, and so even if I wanted to be comfortable and have all these privileges and all that, you know, because of the ways that racism and misogyny and sexism map onto me, it makes it untenable for me to pitch my tent and be like, this is my home eternal. No, it's not. I'm passing through. And thank God for that.
Well, there are certain experiences in the world too. I don't know how much this intersects with what you're saying, where it's like, there are children who die at age 1.
Absolutely.
There are people who just live, they get no education. They're beaten down. There are people in countries where women can't be seen in public. You just think of the whole scope of the world's suffering. If this world was our home and our only home, this world would kind of be a joke and actually like kind of a mean, sick joke at that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I can even though I've had an experience in the world, which obviously and probably in many ways is similar to yours, but actually really different from yours too, I can get filled with a lot of emotion, especially when I'm having just like a hard day at thinking of this idea of the world is not my home.
Yeah.
Because it feels so futile sometimes. Like you can't actually get ahead. It doesn't work. Fundamentally, things just, I think it was the philosopher Immanuel Kant. I just thought of this the other day. He said, the 18th century philosopher said, of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. Just kind of a dark thing to say, but it's like, it's kind of like this idea of the fall, you know? This idea,
everything's mixed on this side.
Like it's hard to straighten things out and make it really work. I thought that there was a way into conversation there, even tying back to some things you've already said about your experience as a Black female theologian in particular, about this idea of centering in theology, like systematic theology with a Y, the systematic proper theology, you know, is often, historically has been overwhelmingly a white male enterprise. Yeah. And yet, one of the most vibrant areas in theology and biblical studies over the past 20 years, 50 years, let's say, has been the rise of a lot of, I don't really even know what to call these approaches. I'm probably calling them the wrong thing, but I'll just say, like identity-based approaches. Womanist scholarship, Black
theology,
female approaches, or mujerista or Latinx approaches to this. The Society of Biblical Literature, which I'm a part of and I present at, they have a thriving Pacific Islander section.
Wonderful.
You know, all these kinds of native biblical interpretations. And it made me wonder, you know, as a white person in biblical studies, when I talk with students, I'm often like, well, the problem with the label identity approaches, it almost assumes like there are all these identities, right? You have an identity, you have an identity. But then the real normal theology is just what it is. But what it is actually, in a lot of cases, white theology. So that too would be an identity type approach to be. But I mean, I don't know, like when you approach this big monolith of systematic with the Y, you know, theology as a white enterprise, like what feels to your perspective white about it or identity based, or what does that mean to you, I guess?
So when I came in, it was predominantly white male world. I didn't really have any other models. You know, I just put my head down and did my work.
They put you in seminary, you read the white dudes who did the systematic theology.
That's what you did.
You read them.
But also, but there is a sense in which, and I remember this erasure there at my seminary of the African origins, though, of the faith.
Wow.
You know, so from Origen to Athanasius to Augustine, like, like these guys were African theologians. So these are
Athanasius Augustine in particular is sometimes vaunted as this idea of like white theology, and he's from he's from Northern Africa, right?
So that's why I'm just always like, what are you talking about? And so for me, it's about recovery, you know, of the Eastern Christian faith. It's an Eastern religion, which is what I write about in the Decolonized Discipleship chapter in Truth Tables, Black Women's Musings on Life, Love, and Liberation. So it's like, it's not so much the faith that's the problem, it's our reception of it, you know, because I'm like, what are y'all talking about? When people talk about the Trinity and all these things, like, do you know that African theologians were the ones that came up with these things? So it's always it's trying to recover that, you know, and also trying to disabuse the faith of the tentacles, you know, of white supremacy that are attached to it. Yeah, so I don't necessarily have an issue, you know, with those things, but I have an issue with the erasure.
Yeah, tell me more about the erasure or the tentacles. Like, what difference does it make? Where have you seen that at play?
Yeah, I mean, well, for me, it was literally seminary professors like dismissing, you know, the fact of African roots, you know, of the faith, dismissing and whitewashing, literally whitewashing, you know, these African theologians. And I'm like, what? Like, why do you need them to be white?
Right.
Like, first of all, why
do you think they needed them?
I mean, from my vantage point, it just seemed that they just could not believe or bring themselves to believe that they would be prized, you know, theological concepts and foundations of our faith could have came forth, you know, from African theologians. But that is the truth, and that's what it is. And God be praised, actually, you know, for that. You know, the diversity and the beauty and the tapestry of the faith, you know, it is an Eastern religion, like, you know, and that's the facts of the matter. The ends of the earth that Jesus was talking about, that's us in the West. Hello, like, you know what I mean? Like,
we were the undiscovered place.
We are, you know. So I just think that there is a real hard, for some reason. I remember professors like really hammering at home, and I was like, and why do you need that? Like, why do you need? Why do they have to look like you?
Oh man,
it doesn't make it true. It don't matter how many times you say it.
I wonder if you could help us think about this concept of like whiteness theologically. I know this is like an explosive issue for some people, or it's just hard to think about because it's like, well, I mean, like as a white person, you get caught right away. You're like, well, if there's black theology, I should be able to have white theology. It's like, what? Like white supremacist theology? Like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something else. Like what? I can't have an identity. You get an identity, but I don't get an identity. You know, it gets like very kind of... But like, from a theological perspective or from a spiritual perspective, how do you view this idea of like whiteness?
Yeah.
Like, what is it?
Well, yeah.
What do people mean when they say that? What do you mean when you hear that?
That's a concept, you know, that was used or is. Unfortunately, I wish it was past tense, but is used to subjugate those who are not, right? And so that it makes white identity normative, right? And constant and superior, you know, to those who are non-white.
That was that normalness we were talking about earlier. There's normal theology, and then there's all the identities. It's like,
exactly, that's the whiteness in play. Yeah, exactly.
No, there's definitely a perspective there. There's definitely a thing that's created there. And, you know, and Absolutely. It's like, as people point out with skin color, like my skin isn't like literally white. No. I know it's almost literally white, but like, you know, so this, even these color words that we use, right? Black, white. Well, you know, like what does the color black look like? What does the color white? So you use these things. Exactly. They're opposed to each other.
This is black.
This is black. So this paper is white. Yeah. I'm almost. It's close. But
it's actually not.
It's not quite.
But it's not quite. But you know what I'm saying. But exactly, it's a concept, right? You know, actually used to organize, though, but organize in a way that stratifies, right? That keeps white people who identify as white at the top, and subjugates, you know, black, brown, and of course our indigenous, neighbors
Right.
too, relegating us to the bottom, so that it's always this comparison,
Right.
toward
Right.
what is right, and we see it all the time in theology, right? And I mean, you just raised it, like, this is normal, and then these are the identity,
Right.
ones, as if there's not some
even
sort
to
of,
use the word identity implies that there's always this other thing against which the thing is defined, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that is the concept, and people can, cater to and try to move toward that, or try to live within the construct and the confines, of that whiteness. It shows up all the time. I wrote about it in the decolonized discipleship chapter about biblical manhood and womanhood, right? How white norms, are elevated and set up as the standard for biblical manhood and biblical womanhood, that say a Black woman and Black man can't necessarily live up to, right? Because of structural injustices, right? And socioeconomic stratification and things that limit, right? Because they're based off middle class to upper middle class white norms, and so that was always meant to be exclusionary.
It sounds like an invitation really to go back to scripture too.
Hello.
And to
Yes.
to derive norms there and to allow that to challenge. I read an author recently, Caitlin Chess, raised this idea, like, when do we ever interpret the Bible against our own interests? Like, how hard that is to do.
Yes.
And especially when you have, speaking for all white males for all time, as I will, like, we have lots of interests
Oh, for sure.
in the system, and in the way that things work. And so to speak out of that, it's like, why would I ever interpret that in a way that would limit or relegate me to some other side role? Like, that's a really hard thing to do.
Hard to do.
Really
it's
hard.
Really hard. Only the Spirit can help us do that. Only the Holy Spirit can help us.
I had experienced at a professional conference around this issue that really opened my eyes. It wasn't like, I'm not trying to play some kind of like white eye-opening savior narrative here. I realized all things and it worked out, but nor am I asking you to solve this problem for me, but it really shook me in a way. Like, I saw that there was a session at a professional conference in biblical studies on feminist interpretation. I was like, oh, I'd like to go in there. I'd like to know.
Yeah.
I walked in the door. It was like 100 women and 0 men. And like several of the women were breastfeeding babies in the session. I was like, this is super, super feminism here. Yeah. And I felt so out of place, but it actually raised this idea for me. And I sat through the session and it was all like theology and ideas that I'd never heard before.
Yeah, wow.
And I felt so uncomfortable. And I think,
that's good.
But I reflected on it and I thought to myself, gosh, I wonder if this is how it feels when you have a baby at a conference and you come into this room like systematic theology and you're like, oh, I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
And then you just see like the manel, the all male panel up there.
That's right.
Right. And you feel that feeling. And I had a similar feeling in a Black biblical studies session one time where I walked in. I thought, oh, this will be great. There'll be all kinds of people in here. Opened the door. It was all Black. And I felt like everyone looked at me, but just imagining that feeling in reverse for what it might be like as a Black scholar, of which there are too few, but many excellent Black scholars in biblical studies who would come into a room and without even sharing their ideas, without even vetting their ideas, it's like automatically this like visual thing for people. But it also, I don't know, it just made me also feel a little bit, I don't know what you think about this. It made me feel a little bit like, gosh, is there any space where we can do this together? Or do we just kind of go into our identity groups and do this stuff?
Identity groups, yeah.
Like is that a problem we should even be trying to solve? Or should we be burrowing down into the groups? Like, how do you feel that should work?
I do. I think there's a space for a need for affinity groups for sure. I think that's important, where you can learn from one another, be refueled too, right? Because people, are in all types of different institutions, right? And sometimes they're one of two, or the first and only.
Right.
Whew,
where you would need the support of a community around something like that.
Absolutely.
Especially if people don't give it to you automatically, or it's just hard to get.
Absolutely. But I do think that there, because of the internet, social media, and just the democratization of knowledge, we can always be reading these people. Now, that's the thing. I think the question is, who do you reach for? Yeah. Though, whose book do you choose to read? Whose perspectives do I choose to learn? Right. And who do I choose to cite and incorporate in my work and add in my syllabi? I mean, but I do think it's important for people that are part of the dominant culture to do the work to reach beyond maybe the typical sources that they usually would go toward. Right. Because we absolutely have to read the white male scholars. There's you're not going to get out of seminary without that. Right. You all can absolutely get out of seminary without ever reading, from a Black biblical scholar.
Right. But nobody should get out of seminary.
You should
without
not.
That.
But Yeah, exactly.
But I felt that even as a teacher in a classroom. I'm teaching right now for the first time in 4 years, a seminary class. And I felt like that as I'm putting together the syllabus and the readings, there's this tendency you just kind of go back to your 3 or 4 favorites.
Yeah.
And those 3 or 4 favorites just happen to be people who are my teachers who just happened. I'll give you one guess. Don't even guess what their race and gender was, right? But it actually took work and it actually took more time and it was a little bit harder than it might seem to be. Okay, let's go deeper. I just want to go deeper into this.
You have to read, and you had to read them, so your sources.
You have to read it. Yeah, you have to check too. And nobody, this idea that, I would just throw people in only because of their race without qualification. Nobody would want that. That would hurt people.
You gotta read it. Yeah.
But finding the excellence takes a little bit of work when you're not familiar. And I felt it. I felt the burn a little bit.
It takes
and
work.
I've also failed on this front too.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I could read you something. It's a long quote, but I thought to myself, I want to talk to Ekemini about this quote. I read this recently in The Atlantic. It's by George Packer. It's called The Valley. It's about Phoenix and about the water crisis in Phoenix and also just the politics of Arizona. But it's also about faith and it's also about spirituality. And at this point, it's also about identity. And I wondered if we could use this to dive a little bit deeper into this question of identity. So this is a bit of a long quote, but we'll do a little commentary along the way. And I just want to get your just blunt, total reaction to this whole thing.
Right.
The author, George Packer, says he's talking to a woman, Christy Kelly, a black female Trump supporter in Arizona. And he said, I asked if she, Christy Kelly was her name. I asked if she didn't regard Trump as a bigot. Isn't Trump a bigot? Absolutely not, Kelly said cheerfully. Trump has been one of the #1 names quoted in rap music going back to the 80s, maybe the 90s. Black people have loved Trump. Mike Tyson loved him. Quote, Republicans just had to learn to speak with more sensitivity so they didn't get labeled automatically racist. Kelly and Lopez, another woman he spoke to, defied the rules of identity politics. They could not be counted on to vote according to their race or ethnicity. Whether or not we agreed, talking with these women made me somewhat hopeful. Identity. Now, here's the part that I think this is tough. I don't know what to think about this. He says, identity is a pernicious form of political division because its appeal is based on traits we don't choose and can't change. It's inherently irrational and therefore likely to lead to violence. Identity politicians, and Trump is one, don't win elections with arguments about ideas or by presenting a vision of the world more attractive than their opponents. They win by appealing to the solidarity of group identity, which has to be mobilized by whipping up fear and the hatred of other groups. Unlike identities, ideas are open to persuasion, and persuasion depends on understanding and reaching other people. But when partisanship itself becomes a group identity, dividing us into mutually unintelligible blocks with incompatible realities, then the stakes of every election are existential, and it becomes hard to live in the same country without killing each other. I wondered, drawing that into conversation with this idea of these quote unquote identity approaches to theology, there's a kind of a point he's trying to make, which is he's saying this division into these identity groups is irrational and ultimately leads us into incomprehensible communities where it's like you don't understand me and I don't understand you and we're living in alternate universes. Do you think that that's true? I mean, he's critiquing, I guess, the idea of these identity groups and the idea of identifying oneself that way. I think. I don't know. What's your reaction to that? That's a big ball of wax right there. I know.
I think we have to be careful with that because when we think about Jesus, Jesus is both God and man, right? And he assumed a body because, according to Athanasius, what is not assumed is not redeemed, right? And so,
gorgeous quote.
Our
on
bodies,
the incarnation, what a source!
Yeah, right there. Our bodies and our souls matter, And so I think, and sometimes when people start to go, well, these identity politics, and these things are illogical, and our identities, and I'm like, okay, are we Gnostics? Are we trying to say that our bodies just don't matter at all? No, it matters. We're embodied souls. It's okay, and I think that matters, right? And so, and I think we have to reclaim that. I think that's a good thing. Even right now, Jesus is embodied right now. As a brown-skinned Palestinian Jewish man, yeah, that's his identity. Wow. So I was like, let's not, we don't have a faith in Casper the Friendly Ghost. This is embodied being.
The rationality could float away.
What are we saying here?
It sounds like you're saying the rationality, no body identity, it could just float away into
it's so weird. Yeah, it's a weird thing, So, and I'm not saying that it's our bodies and everything is ultimate, but it's not nothing.
It's not nothing, and it's part of it. Well, we believe. In the creed, we proclaim, I believe in the resurrection of the body, which means it's not going away. That's proper theology. Body, exactly. Yeah. So I was like, no. I think sometimes we can go a little too far with it. The thing about
race is that it's not rooted in anything in biology. It's made up for the point of stratifying
whiteness, blackness, these big labels
to stratify, to keep us, apart, to make sure some got more than others, right? So it is meant to put a wedge, between one another. But then on the other hand, in this quote, I mean, okay, every person of color is not a race scholar. It's not, it's not. This is not. This is not their, their specialty, and their area of expertise. And sometimes can be unbeknownst to them, are not always aware of even the ways in which race maps onto their lives, right? And some people can actually really believe in the bootstrap theology, of if I just work harder, if I just put in more hours, I will get to whatever whatever their, just say a financial goal is, but not necessarily knowing like, well, but you're actually making less than your white counterpart. You're actually making less than your Asian counterpart. Let's interrogate that. What if it has something to do with your work ethic and everything to do with the way in which, the wages, are stratified for you simply because you are Black or brown, so anyway, so that person may not know, what I'm saying, and I'm also not trying to diminish, their intelligence. I'm just saying they may not be aware though of some of the systemic forces at work and in play in their lives. And we just saw, just from the debate, the ways in which, Trump has again used race, in order to divide, in the ways that he has proliferated this rumor, about Haitian immigrants who are working
I heard
hard
about that
in Springfield, Ohio. It's terrible. Bomb threats upon bomb threats happening.
Well,
and they're being targeted.
I also read that
terrible.
the vice presidential candidate has also admitted that he knew that it was made up.
Yeah.
But that's,
Vance,
if you have to get people's attention and whatever. Okay.
It's wrong.
We've gone into deep waters here, and we're running out of time. This has been so delightful. I'm already thinking in new ways. I appreciate this so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.